Last year, Pashas Noach, I looked it up. What we did was, we talked about the question if Avram was thrown into the furnace. There's a question whether we know that a miracle happened to Abraham. The Gemara says in Baba Basra. But because the Bible says he was thrown into a fire, and the question becomes, how come it's not written in the Chumash? How come the story of being thrown to the chasm is not in the Chumash? There's a number of answers to it. The Ramban answers, and this is what we learned last year, that we know the Gemara says a miracle happened to him, but what the miracle is not so simple. The Pirkei the Rebbe is notwithstanding, the Rambam says that the miracle was a natural event. It wasn't supernatural. And that the reason it's not written in the Chumash is because the Torah only records the utterly supernatural, things that happen within the framework of nature, is not written in the Chumash. That's what we did last year. And this year we're going to go backwards a little bit. I want to do the story of the Dor Hafluga, the generation of the Great Dispersion, or the Tower of Babel, as it's called. It's a story in the Chumash. It takes up a grand total of 9 psukim, and it's an unbelievable story. It's an amazing story. The emes is the more you learn the beginning of the Chumash, the more you realize that every event is not just a historic event. It's history. The expression history repeats itself is true. The first record of each historic event is in the Chumash. And then it repeats itself. For example, it says in Sfarim, in the Farshim, that the first war ever fought is the war described in next week's Pasha. And so on. So the story of Cain and Abel, the story of Adam and Chava, every one of these stories is monumental because it's a precedent. It's not a good precedent, but it's a precedent that enlightens the human condition, the frailties of the human condition, and also the good possibilities of the human condition. The story of the Tower of Babel is a strange story. Let's tell the story from the beginning. Adam was a big tzaddik. Adam and Chava. Adam was made by God himself. He was a brilliant person. He was the smartest man who ever lived. He had a phenomenal chokhmah. And during his lifetime, the world became pagan, became idolatrous. And one day we'll explore that story as well. It's an issue unto itself. Which is, of course, very, very strange. How could the world have become pagan, especially under the watchful eye or the presence of Adam Rishon? And the Rambam explains that the evolution of Avodah Zarah, of paganism, was gradual, and that it actually started out philosophical. The first pagans were intellectuals, and they understood that Hashem's relationship with the world is through intermediate forms or forces or energies need to be honored. And then it devolved from there into raw, useless, senseless Avodah Zarah. Then the Mabel happens. Right? You know, Rashi says in Chumash, there were other tragedies before. There were floods. A third of the world was wiped away. There were plenty of tragedies that predated the flood that are hinted to in the Chazal, in the Chumash and in the Chazal. The flood washes everything away and we start over. We started a world over with 8 people, 4 couples. Noach and his wife and his 3 boys and their wives. And the flood was in the year 1656. 1656 was the flood. Avraham Avinu was born in 1948. That means 200, and you were also born in 1948. I thought you were younger than that. 292 years after the flood. Noach was still alive, Shem was still alive, all of them, all of ancient Jews, those individuals who were in the ark and knew what kind of miracle it was that they survived and were still alive, their children and grandchildren were off to the races. They had become pagan again. They had forgotten God to such an extent that Avraham Avinu was credited with rediscovering God. It's one of the most ironic things. It says in Sodom, Avraham ben Noach. Avraham was 58 when Noach died. So Noach was alive for a third of Avraham Avinu's life. And yet Avraham did not hear the name God mentioned as a child. He had to rediscover God. This was the extent or the rate, the accelerated pace at which this decline happened. One of the events that happens after the flood is the story of the Great Dispersion, the story of the Tower of Babel, which occurred when Avraham Avinu was 52. In other words, in the year 2000, exactly. Avraham Avinu was 52 years. The Great Dispersion happened. What does it say in the Chumash? Let's read the text. What is the story of the Tower of Babel? The entire nation was one tongue. And they had one idea. They spoke the same language and they had one philosophy. They traveled to the east. They found a valley. The land of Shinnah, and they settled there. They told one another, Hava, come. And she says, Hazminu, prepare yourselves. Let's make bricks, artificial stone, which is also one of those firsts. The Torah makes reference to the artificial creation of stone. Now, where did it begin? Here it began. We'll heat them in an oven. And in the oven, they used bricks as stone. They used clay as mortar. Now, of course, the simple translation here is, they lived in a valley, there were no mountains. No mountains, there were no rocks, no stones. No stones, they couldn't build homes as the ancient peoples had. They built homes out of stone. So they invented a new stone, artificial stone, bricks. They said, Hava, come, let us. Nidna lanu ir, we'll build a city. We'll build a tower. V'neshim b'shamayim, its head is going to look to the heavens. V'nasa lanu shem, we'll make for ourselves a name. Pen, perhaps, in other words, to protect against. Nafuts will become scattered up, over the face of the entire earth. And they did it. Now, it's interesting to note, this is not what I'm intending to discuss, but Rashi points out, who were these guys? The family of Chom. There was Shem, Chom, and Yafes. How do you say Chom in English?
Ham.
You're not kidding. Ham. Not Hom?
Ham.
Ham.
Yeah. Ham.
No wonder they were.
That was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
So Rashi says that it was the descendants of Chom. So immediately you learn that it's not the whole world. It's a segment of the population. Even though the pasuk gives you the impression that it's the whole world.
Right.
Other Mefarshim emphasize that it was mostly the descendant of Shem. One of the Mefarshim says Avraham participated. And Shem participated. And they state some of the Mefarshim.
Hey, you gotta go visit your relatives, you know what I mean?
In any case, I'm not sure, but it's okay. In any case, they decided to live together. They went to the east, and they built a tower. So the pasuk continues. God descended to see the city and the tower, and Shabbatim the other which people built. Now, this allusion, God descended, is a world unto itself. Discussions for a different time. And God said, Hein, behold, Amecha, they're one nation. V'safa achas lachula, they speak one language. This is only the beginning of what they intend to do. Now, for God, considering that this is only the beginning, there is nothing to prevent them from all the other stuff they intend to do, and I wouldn't want that to happen. This is only the beginning. Who knows what's going to happen later on? And nobody could stop them. They can do anything they want. And therefore, Hava, Hashem says to the Malachim, come. He uses the same exact expression that they use. They use the word Hava. And Hashem says, Hava, come, let us praise us. Neda, let us descend in Navla, Sham, Safasim. It's entangled, it's confused, it's mixed up their languages. Ashala Yishmu Ish Sfasri, no man should understand the language of his fellow. God Almighty dispersed them from there, Apnei Kolos, the face of the whole world. And they ceased to build the city. Okay, therefore, it's called Babel. It was in that location that Hashem entangled the language of all the people. And from that location, God scattered them up across the face of the whole world. This is the story. What was the sin?
Can I ask you a question about that? What was the purpose of Hashem doing this?
That's exactly what I want to discuss. What was their sin? Achdus is a good idea. We all know how wonderful it is people to get along. All they wanted to do was collaborate. All they wanted to do was live together, to exist together, and to have a name for themselves. That's what it says. Hashem goes and checks it out. He says, this is only a beginning, and nobody could stop them. I thought Hashem was in charge, by the way. I didn't know nobody could stop them. Last time I checked, the Eibishter was in charge of the world. He said, I can't stop them. Now, there are so many parts of this story that we could explore. One of the parts of the story is this idea that Hashem says, I can't stop them. And that's a whole, in other words, it's a whole yin unto itself. We could also discuss this notion of Hashem descending. We can also discuss, the Rashi says, the Gemara says that this generation not only lost their life in this world, they lost the other world. They lost Olam Haba. They lost their world to come.
For building the tower.
For building this tower. The generation of the flood, there's two opinions in the Gemara, whether they have Olam Haba or not. The generation of the Tower of Babel certainly doesn't have. But the Rebbe observes it's a funny thing. The generation of the flood was pulverized, and yet they may still be worthy of Olam Haba. This generation wasn't really punished. It was just spread out. And they lost their Olam Haba in everybody's account and everybody's opinion. So there's a lot of different things we could focus on. But I want to focus on the story itself. What was their crime? What did they do wrong? And when you look in the Mefarshim, you find quite a gamut, quite a kaleidoscope, quite a variety of different interpretations. Some that are very, very simple, and some that are very deep and mystical. What was their issue? What was their deal? And what was their aveda? What was their sin? But think about it in simple words first. What was before and what was after? Everybody spoke the same language. Everyone was of the same race. There were no people with flat noses or horizontal eyes or flat heads or short and stocky bodies and tall and thin. Everybody was the same race and spoke the same language. And the generation of the dispersion began a process which would eventually genetically and racially divide people. We speak different languages, we live in different continents, we have different cultures, we look physically different. A few minutes, you don't mind, a few minutes. So just that alone is a very powerful, it's an amazing idea. It explains, first of all, the source of languages. People who study language, the whole world believes that we all came from apes. And we once didn't speak languages and we developed language. And the truth is that they all admit that development of audible language is a great feat. It's not a simple thing to do. And then there's such a thing called etymology, the study of the roots of languages. According to Torah, every language comes from Hebrew, and it was split up by the story of the great Haflaga. I just want to make a comment. What kind of world do you think we'd live in if we all had the same race and spoke the same language? People have claimed that race is a close second to religion for all the problems in the world. Religion, of course, is responsible for every murder, for every act of violence and immorality and power seeking. It's all religion's fault. Everything is religion's fault. But race is also pretty responsible. I want to make a suggestion. If we were all of one race, we'd be equal opportunity killers. The division of races pins one group against another, but it also binds the members of a group to each other. Just a common sense commentary about this story. I think it's interesting to see it that way. It's true that everybody being the same is better, but there's a silver lining to this cloud. Family, community, this cohesion has a lot to do with the neighbor. If you're the only family on the planet, right, what happens when the family gets together? What happens when the family gets together? They fight like cats and dogs. Hello, welcome. Bring another family into the mix, all of a sudden they're getting along and they've got a bond. This is one way of seeing, so to speak, the good side of the Dor Hafluga. Having said that, I would like to explore different commentaries on Dor Hafluga, not necessarily in a chronological order. In other words, we're not going to start from the earliest commentator. We're going to start from what I think is the most practical commentator. We're going to begin with the Klei Yakar. I'm not the Klei Yakar, the Ralbag. The Ralbag is wild. I mean, it may not seem so wild to you, but it seems very wild to me. The Ralbag is page Tzadik Ches. In other words, if you've got this pamphlet, which has got a lot of stuff in it, it's the front side of the second to the last page. Page Tzadik Ches. The Ralbag actually begins on the page before, but that's not that important. Vov. Listen to this Ralbag. It sounds like ecology. Listen to this Ralbag. Ulefi shekvaro Hashem yizbarach. Hashem saw. You have it? Yeah. Shahakibutz la'adam b'malkam echad min ha'aretz. The gathering of all of humans in one place on the planet, who bilti na'os l'kiyum hamin ha'anushi, is not good for the survival of the humankind. Keeping all people in one place means that if they're wiped out, they're all wiped out. This is like Yid or Ruach HaKodesh. It's such a chitzoniistic commentary. It's conceivable that in a particular place, in the arts of the land, there should be hesed, there should be destruction. If it can happen from an earthquake, which is a consequence of a collection of air in the center of the earth. That's how we translate earthquakes. We know that it's from tectonic plates, but the movements of the plates have to do with the heat. If from a tornado or from a hurricane, which is which is forceful enough to uproot mountains and to break stone. Avnei Algabish means hail. Shetef Mayim, which I guess means a tsunami. Umasha Yidma Le'elu Asibes, or similar types of causes. How much is so destructive? People got together, they wanted to live together. What was their crime? There was no crime. Perfectly logical thing. The Eibishter wanted the preservation of people. He wanted people to survive. Says that Ralbag, if all humankind stay in one place, they're vulnerable. Now don't forget, it's just the balabas of the world. He can do whatever he wants. But he created the world within a system of Teva. Within the system of Teva there is, quote, accidents. However you reconcile accidents versus Hashgacha Pratis. Says that Ralbag, the Eibush didn't want all man to live together. There should always be survival. If all of man will be in one place, it's conceivable that the whole nation will be wiped out, the whole race will be wiped out with that part of the world. It was therefore imperative to man, he should be scattered in all portions of the earth, the race should be sustained. If one portion of the civilization suffers, the race will be sustained by the remaining. Okay, Hashem wanted to uproot this attitude of staying together. He planted to them in races, in families, using a miracle, chuka, a tendency to invent new languages that would separate them. In other words, they planted in their minds a tendency towards gathering in families, us versus them, develop new languages, and eventually start communicating. Here's an Ralbag. This is an example of why people are afraid of the Ralbag. The Ralbag's commentary, there are a lot of Jews who say you're not supposed to study it at all. Tzemach Tzedek says it's Teir, Ruach HaKodesh, quotes it in Chassidus. This Ralbag, there's no God in this Ralbag at all. To the contrary, God seems helpless, out of control, and since he's helpless and out of control, you got to protect people because, who act. So when you read this Ralbag for the face of it, where is Yiddishkeit in here? Where is Hashem in this Ralbag? And I must tell you that the simple answer to this question is, I don't know. It's a controversial Ralbag. But let me share with you a thought. And I'll try to do this quick because we got a lot more to cover tonight. Until the Baal Shem Tov, most people believed that not everything and everybody has Hashgacha Pratis. Until the Baal Shem Tov, not everybody believed, nobody believed that everybody has Hashgacha Pratis. What does that mean? What do we know Hashgacha Pratis to be? Hashgacha Pratis means Hashem is in charge of everything. He's not only controlling your life, he's creating it. Until the Baal Shem Tov, people believed that Hashgacha Pratis was a schar. You have to earn it. A tzaddik, Hashem is involved in his life. A rasha, Hashem doesn't care about. An animal, Hashem certainly doesn't care about. What does that mean? The world is random, out of control, maybe it's not at all involved. No, that's not what it means. All the early Rishonim had a concept called Hashgacha Klolis. Hashgacha Klolis means a general oversight. In other words, Hashem is involved in the world on two levels. On a personal level and at a remote level. If you're a tzaddik, Hashem gets involved in your life personally. If you're not a tzaddik, Hashem does not get involved in your life personally. Instead, what does Hashem do? He's involved with species. For example, there's 100,000 zebra in the African plains. Hashem wants that in a year from today there should be 100,000. That means some are going to die, some are going to be born, some are going to get eaten. Which live, which die, none of his business. As long as there's a sustaining of the balance. An oversight that's klalistic. And the same is true of everything. The Eibishter doesn't concern himself with the individual, it concerns himself with the species. Chassidus explores this issue and reconciles it. I'm not going into it. But there's this notion of Hashgacha Klolis. This Rabbi says, Pshat and Ralbag. The Ralbag isn't saying, Hashem can't help man. Man is going to be destroyed in a tsunami. I got to protect him from himself. Let me scatter him. The Ralbag is saying like this. In order for me to be involved with man, man has to earn it. Man has to earn my involvement. Hashgacha Pratis, personal intervention of Hashem in the lives of people, you have to earn. If you don't earn it, Hashem's involvement with people is like his involvement with animals. It's general. He doesn't concern himself with Larry, Moe, or Curly, which one lives and which one dies, as long as one of them survives. Because Hashgacha Pratis, the idea that Hashem should care about you, you have to earn. So the Eibishter says, what happens when the people are destroyed? I'm not destroying them. There was already once a Mabul, let's try them again. You can add another stipulation. From them is going to be tzaddikim. Right now they're the shoyim. If right now they're the shoyim, my involvement has to be at a distance. Or in other words, my involvement has to be through derech hateva, through nature. If my involvement has to be through derech hateva, I have to preserve them naturally. I have to make sure the human race survives, even if kayochel I'm not involved. And therefore I have to scatter them. If people are going to be tzaddikim, I don't care if they live in one place, because then I'm going to personally involve myself with them, and I'm going to protect them. If they're going to be the shoyim, I still want them. I want them because of the possible tzaddikim that will come from them, because I promise I'm never going to destroy the world. So the only way I can preserve the human race, assuming they're the shoyim, is by scattering them. This is why the Eibishter says, okay, we got to spread them around. And perhaps the Ralbag is hinting at something deeper. The Ralbag is saying the fact that Hashem needed to scatter them is a simon that they were to show him. The Torah doesn't tell us how they lived. The Torah just tells us they got a law. Hashem's need to scatter them, to protect them from a natural disaster. Meaning to say, Hashem says, I can't help them with Hashgacha Pratis. I can only help them with Hashgacha Pratis. Is in effect saying they weren't worthy of Hashgacha Pratis. So the sin is unspoken. The consequence is spoken. Since they were people who couldn't deserve Hashgacha Pratis, they could only deserve Hashgacha Klolis, i.e. they were not tzaddikim, there was no choice but to scatter them. Now, the Ralbag doesn't say what I said. This is my interpretation. But I think it makes the Ralbag much more Torah. It doesn't sound like ecology. It's Torah. Because of their level, this is the way it had to be. So had they been the Shayim, David says, stay together, I'll protect you. And you'll see in a moment, we're going to learn a Kli Yakar, who says the same thing, but not from a biological, from an ecological point of view, but from a social point of view. Okay? So now we're going to read the Kli Yakar. The Kli Yakar is very long. It's also in small words. So we're going to jump around the Kli Yakar. The Kli Yakar is in the beginning. It's on the Chumash. And I believe I actually made an arrow. The beginning. The Kli Yakar says a interessante Sache. He says a very interesting thing. And the emphasis, you have this idea in the Moed Nevuchim, in different contexts. I'll first tell it to you about Peh B'Kitzur, and then I'll just skim it. There's too much to do. Getting along is a good thing. People getting together and saying, let's be friends, let's get along, is a wonderful, wonderful thing. The question is, can it be sustained? Can people decide we're going to be friends? Can they sustain that friendship? Let's say the answer is no. If they cannot sustain the friendship, is it better for them to get along for a while, notwithstanding later on they're going to have to be diversified, divergent, or should they initially separate? You know, historically, everybody knows about the Huns, right? The Mongoloids, the Mongols, not the Mongols. They were animals, but they conquered the whole world. How did the empire of the Huns collapse? You don't even know how the Huns empire. In other words, how did the Mongolians lose control of Europe and Asia Minor and Africa and India? How? Politics. Attila the Hun was one man. When he died, he had 3 children. When they died, they had 9 children. So they started splitting up the empire. Then they started competing. So what did they do? They all ran home. They left their local serfdoms, their local kingdoms. They went back to Mongolia to fight it out. And when they left, the people took freedom. They've Chorik gemacht the Welt. I mean, one of the historically, it was history's greatest Holocaust. I mean, what the Mongoloids did, no one realizes. But it happened so fast. They came, they destroyed the world. They destroyed every remnant of Rome. They destroyed the Roman Empire. They destroyed every column, every Colosseum, every statue. I mean, not that we're so worried about it as Jews. The Romans weren't exactly our best friends. Within 50 years, history was gone. Why? Because they couldn't get along. The Kli Yakar says a push to Gedank. Here's a group of people who say, let's be friends. Great idea. But they added 3 words, V'nasa lanu shem. We're going to make for ourselves a name. We want to be famous. We want to be great. Says the Kli Yakar, the Eivishter says people whose focus is on themselves are going to end up killing each other. If they would not say the 3 words, V'nasa lanu shem, the Eivishter would say, bravo. I agree. Great idea. The whole nation will get together. Let's live together. We're going to build a tower. The tower is going to be the symbol of our unity. We're all going to keep focusing on the tower and stay together. But when they added, and that's one shame, we're going to make for ourselves fame, that statement was the beginning of a division. And the Abish said it's better that I divide them than they actually play it out. And it reads well in the words. Hachila Mases, they started to do something which is actually peaceful. But what is it going to bring to? So the Abish goes ahead, scatters them, disperses them, spreads them all over the world to protect them from themselves. And he says, when tzaddikim get together, since they're bound not by ego but by a common purpose, it's a sustained unity. But when the shoyim get together, since the union is about ego, everyone's ego is separate. So the Eibishter interfered and destroyed the union and the Tower of Babel, what represented, because they said, it was about self-centricity. This is the Kli Yakar. Let's read a little bit. We're not going to read the whole Kli Yakar. Let's read a couple of words of the Kli Yakar. You see what I'm reading? It's the first page, Ayin Ches. Right over here. Oh, yeah, right over here. On the left side. It seems to me, said the Kliyaka, that the significance of the story of the Haflaga was, the Gemara says, Kinis L'Rashayim, a gathering, a meeting of evil people, it's evil for them and evil for the world. Pisa L'Rashayim, spreading the Shayim around, Toiv Lahem, Toiv Lahim. It's good for them and good for the world. And by tzaddikim is exactly the opposite. Lefi, because Shehar evil people, al yedei knisasa, by them getting together, yachshavu beineihem eitzes rois al acherim. They will, by sitting together, they will think bad thoughts about one another. In addition, yimshachu beineihem dividivus umachlekes nisinis. First they're going to be friends, then they're going to start competing, and they end up arguing and being divided and hating each other. This is the vengeful tendencies, the vigilantism you see amongst the groups, amongst the sects. Their intentions are not for the sake of Hashem. Turn the page. It's over here. To make themselves a name on the land. And the reason for why people who get together will eventually not get together, each one has an external purpose, which divides one from the other. Think about politics. Think about American politics. We have a Democratic Party and we have a Republican Party. Because of the Democratic Party, there's union amongst Republicans. Because of the Republican Party, there's union amongst the Democrats. Historically, there have been parties that have become obsolete. They've been so out of the mainstream. What were they called? A very famous party that existed in the beginning of the state.
The Whigs.
The Whigs. Democratic Party is a newer party. They became people didn't vote for them. They stopped existing. What happened? The Republican Party became two. Because the unity wasn't based on them, the unity was based on a common enemy. But if you take away that common enemy, all of a sudden the splits, the chasm start to appear, and the Kliyaka goes into a long, elaborate tarichas. The conclusion is Abish says, I'm doing them a favor. Separate them now. Don't let them be together. Separate them now. So what was the sin? But asal on the shame. We're going to make for ourselves a name means us. It was ecocentric. It wasn't about serving Hashem by themselves. The Eibishter separated them not because they're doing anything wrong at the moment, because the Eibishter anticipates that if we let them stay together, they'll eat each other up alive. You know, one of the best things that ever happened to the Arabs?
Jews.
That the Jews occupied Israel. They've been killing each other for ages. And they do a better job than anybody in the world. They found an enemy. They found,
And vice versa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we're not taking a lekach. Leider. But they found a common enemy. It brings people together. This is the oldest truism in politics. It's called the politics of hate. You want support? Create an enemy and lather up the people. It's human nature. They're not unified under your flag. They're unified against their flag. You know?
Hitler did.
Exactly. In any case, this is another pshat of Dor Hafluga. So you have to two taichi. According to the Rabag, he doesn't say it, but we're interpreting it. Hashem says, if a natural disaster happens, these people, I can't protect them. It means they were Rishayim. And the Abraham says, I want these Rishayim, so I'm protecting them from themselves. So he scattered them, not to punish them, to prevent them from being punished. The Kliyaka, who's an Achrin, it's a whole different category, says, the Abraham to punish them in anticipation, like a B'nai who made it. They're going to bring the Machlekes. Okay? Now, Rabbi say, let's learn Rabbeinu B'chaya, Interessante Rabbeinu B'chaya. Very interesting Rabbeinu B'chaya. And, yeah. It's Ra Lehem and Ra Le'elam state.
Why they spread good? Every place there.
If Ken did answer them, I can make up potatoes.
It's like Fatima. One of them words right there. I go crazy.
The pshat is that when tzaddikim are together, they create a concentrated force. And the concentrated force, even though they're in one place, affects the world more substantially. The Rabbeinu B'chai has 4 or 5 different pshatim. I'm sorry it's all scribbled on. I couldn't find another Rabbeinu B'chai, so you'll have to just put up my scribble.
Where's it started?
It's on page Kuf Chav Zayin. Kuf Chav Zayin, this page here. The page has got a lot of writing on it. Okay, all have a lot of writing on it. Okay, let me here. Look, this is the page is Chumash. The back of the second page, okay? The back of the second page on the left side. We're just going to read the pshat. He says a very interesting thing that Rabbeinu B'chai does. Let's read it inside. Yud Aleph Daleth. You see what I'm reading right over here? He says, Al derech hapshat. The pshat of why they had to be dispersed is they wanted to settle in one place, to be collected as one. They could find no other place large enough, vast enough to tolerate their numbers other than the Valley of Shin. It actually says the same thing. Okay, not to live in this Migdal, they therefore chose to build the tower and the city. She machzik is kula, that should sustain them all. The city, it should be a metropolis, we should all live in it. The Migdal and the tower will be l'oisel, the shame, would be a sign, and for notoriety, for fame. B'nei kol ha'elam, that all the peoples of the world would see it. V'yashiru negdei, and they would turn towards it. V'yishyashu ba'eis, they would all settle in the city. V'lei b'makam acher, and not anyplace else. Their vision was all people should live together. Now, in heaven's name, what is wrong with that? The reason Hashem scattered them is very simple. They opposed God's intent. What was God's intent? Hashem wanted that man should spread all over the world, and settle every continent, which we should God created for man to settle. Interessante Sache. What happened? They wanted to stay together. Maybe should have spread out. Now I want you to understand something. This is a religious position, and I hope I don't affect you too much, but maybe I won't. We live in an age that's obsessed with nature. That's the truth. And the philosophy of our civilization is that man is the destroyer of nature. He's the enemy of nature. And that nature is a beautiful thing. Now, to a very great extent, Taylor would completely agree with that. Taylor is not in favor of hunting, for sport for sure. Taylor is not in favor of destroying forests, destroying trees. And it even says in Mefarshim that there are laws in Taylor that were designed specifically to preserve species, to prevent extinction of species. On the other hand, Taylor does not consider the jungle or the forest ideal. Taylor considers it the job of man to tame the earth, to civilize the world. Doesn't mean you have to destroy the forests, but there has to be civility, order, neatness, cleanliness, beauty. This is the function of man. Abishah created a world after the original sin and then the sin of the Mabul and so on. The world can produce feral environments, crazy jungles, right? Ever watched National Geographic? Never.
I saw the books.
You see it once in a while. What's National Geographic? If you're not 100% fit and in the best shape, I'm going to eat you now. It's such a brutal world. There is zero margin for error. Zero. If you're 99% capacity of fitness, you're chicken soup. It's such a brutal world. And the Abishah says to man, you have to change. You have to tame the earth. The world has to be a good place. So man came along and said, okay, we'll tame the earth. Here. And Abishah says, no. Spread out. I want you to bring the message of peace to the whole world. And they built the Tower of Babel. Why? They were not listening to Hashem. Hashem said spread out, and they said we want to stay together. Now, we could romanticize this. Why do they want to stay together? They wanted to stay together so they could serve God. They wanted to stay together because they knew that if they're going to separate, later on they're going to end up being jealous of one another and hating one another. They may have had very ideal motives. But the Abish says, this is not what I want. But said they wanted to stay together because they knew that they're same race, same language. It'll prevent fighting, politics, and murder. You could make that case. They wanted to stay together. This is the Abish did. So the Abish did, it's like all very nice. I want, you need to tzedach aliyah. Diversify, become separate, develop different races, different languages, and maybe compete, kill one another, but civilize the world. So their sin was the desire to stay together, and the Abish said, I want you to spread out. Interessante pshat, a very interesting pshat.
But the thing is that I don't understand is that if you were to stay together, the population increases and increases and increases, you're going to spread out anyway, because you can only have so many people in one spot at the same time. Okay,
it's a complicated question. It really is a complicated question, but that would take a long time. Hashem gave them a mandate. Hashem says, pick yourself up and move. The Rebbe once in a Fabrengen actually said that after the Mabul, all life came from Gan Eden, the Rebbe said, and it radiated to the whole world. And as man spread out amongst the islands, they brought with them a lot of ancient ideas. That's why you find in South America, in the cultures of the Indians, ideas that are mentioned in the Gemara or in the Tanakh. Because everything started in one place and it radiated. This was the Abish isn't there. Now, Rabbi say, there are many more pshatim on Dor Hafluga in addition to the three I just mentioned. But we're gonna skip. We're going to one more. Okay? The Rabbi brings a bunch of other pshatim. And the final pshat is that the sin of the Dor Hafluga was the Nasa Lanu Shem. The Nasa Lanu Shem means we're going to worship the name of God as opposed to God Himself. What was the sin of the Dor Hafluga? Let's get together. Let's read. What does the pasuk say? Hava. Milvna lanu irodu city umido the tower. Reshi bashma going to the heavens. Nasa lanu shem. We make for ourselves a name. Like the Rabbi Nuchayev and Nasa lanu shem. We're going to worship the name as opposed to the Eibishter himself. And if I had more time, I can give you the long version of it. But the short version of it is this. We've discussed this many times in the past. We will discuss it many times in the future. But what separates the unity of God from paganism, idol worship? We believe that there's angels. We believe that there's all of these different forces. But we believe that God controls them. That the angels have no free will. Hashem uses them like tools, like pawns. What makes something an idol? What makes something a getz? What makes something pagan? That you worship the angel. You make from the angel a self-contained entity. When you need rain, you pray to Michael. When you need fire, you pray to Gabriel. I'm sure you can find a more exotic pronunciation for that. With Methuselah and all the rest. The Avodah Zarah, what makes something pagan is not that you invent something new. That you divide, you split, you separate. Right? There's the Eibishter. Hashem could have done everything himself. He created, for the purpose of Eli Wild's expertise in Kabbalah, a Hishtalshelus, a hierarchy. I'll drink to anything. Hishtalshelus, a series of layers. There are the names of God, there are the angels, there are the stars and the constellations, all these different forces. If a person acknowledges that they get their blessings from the heaven, but acknowledges the heavens are a tool of God's hand, there's no crime. The crime is the separating. So the Dor Hafluga created a new idea. We're going to worship the name of God. We're not going to worship David himself. We're going to worship God in as much as a relationship with ourselves. But they had a chap. They were original. And this is really, I don't understand exactly what is the oimek shabbat, but this is the Gedai. They did not invent idol worship. They did not invent paganism. It existed before. There were many pagans. But they created a new spin, a new kretch to paganism. What was the difference? Until then, pagans worshipped many gods. But they all knew that there's a super god who's really in charge. I had a girl years ago, Mechonchana, who studied Eastern religions. And she told me that even in Hinduism, there is Mano, there is one. There is, underneath all the layers, there's a concept of one God. It's just that he's not in charge. He's, Hashemayim, Shemayim, Hashem, the heavens and heavens for God, and the earth is for us to mess around on. Until the day of Haflaga, there were many pagans. What does it mean to be a pagan? I'm worshipping the laws of nature. I'm worshipping the God of fire. I'm worshipping the God of wind. I'm worshipping the God of earth. The God of fertility. The God of water. The God of renewal. All these different gods. What makes it pagan is that I attribute to them independent power. But pagans believe that above them all there's a super God. The Gemara calls him the God of gods. So, a pagan believes in Hashem. He just believes Hashem has no power. Or I don't have to directly relate to him. Their invention was a little different. They wanted to worship the name of God, but deny the presence of God. Not say, God exists in the heavens. We have nothing to do with him. There is only the name. They wanted Taka to worship a super God, the name of Hashem himself, but to deny that above the name of Hashem there is Hashem himself. And that Rabbeinu Bachai has an interesting kvetch. He observes that this entire Pasha, the name of Elokim is never used. Usually the name of Hashem used for judgment is Elokim. What does it say over here? Vayered Hashem, Vayemer Hashem, Vayofetz Hashem, Kishon Bolo Avaya. Always, says the Rabbeinu Bachai Favos. Because the Dor Hafluga invented a new chap. We're not going to worship Elokim. We're not going to worship the small gods. We're going to worship the super God. We're going to worship his name, not him. And this was their crime. They wanted to make the name of Hashem the only truth and forget about the Eibishter himself. What does this mean? Wait a minute. But I just want to show you at least the kitzur inside. Page Kuf Chav Tes. See if you can find it. Kuf Chav Tes. Umizeh. I'm just going to read a few lines, and then I'm going to see if I can explain to you the chap, their invention. Second line from the top of the page. It says like this. And again, I'm sorry about the scribble. Umizeh leitim to lapasha zu shas kashem alekim. It's a funny thing. We're reading a story about people who were bad. And Hashem punished. Hashem punished with the name of Elokim. Bad people relate to Elokim. In the entire story of the Haflaga, only Shem Havaya is mentioned. Kishaim Shehizkir, the Pashas HaMabel. In the story of the flood, the name used over and over again is Elokim. The generation of the flood denied the last midah. What does that mean to say? Hashem exists. But the lowest midah of Hashem, we're going to separate it. We're going to make him a God unto itself. They were destroyed only from the lower world. Also from the higher world. Because they distanced Malchus from the higher world. But again, there's an opinion in the Gemara that the Mabel does have a chelik in Mabel. They'll punish measure for measure. Chatu b'Elokim, they sit with the name of Elokim. V'nishchasel lahem ha'aretz shehi b'Elokim. Aval Dor Hafluga, you see it? Aval Dor Hafluga, you had the place? The people of Dor Hafluga, what was their deal? They had to invent a new religion. What was theirs? Kafru b'shem ha'miyuchad. They denied the name of Havaya. Yud Kei Vav Kei. V'lachein ha'nisham, they were punished b'shmei HaGadol with that name. V'had alahem koich, and he showed them his power. Okay? I'm going to stop here. And earlier on, he discussed what I told you. But Nasalam Hashem, they had an idea. We're going to worship the name of Hashem, not Hashem himself. But we're not going to worship the name of Elokim. And we're going to say, there's a super God and there are assistants, sub-gods. We're going to worship the super God, but his name, not him. Now what does that mean? What difference does it mean if you're worshiping the Eibishter, you're worshiping his name? The name of Hashem is the name of Hashem, as opposed to worshiping the Eibishter. And that's very pashut. By the way, this is discussed in Hasidus. You have in the back of here Teda 8 and also in Mem Gimel is a nice mimer. What's the difference between worshiping the Eibush and worshiping His name? Simple. Why do we have names? To one another. Right? If you don't exist, I don't need a name. The concept of a name is relationship. The Dor Hafluga recognize that there is one omnipotent God. But what do they need that omnipotent God for? What He provides them with. What's Zaydav? The notion that Hashem exists, and His existence is not just for them. His existence is true. And therefore their obligation to Hashem is not just based on what they're going to get from Hashem, but based on the fact that Hashem is true. This was their issue. They said, we're going to create a God, one God, but He's a name. A name means to say we're going to worship the Eibishter only in as much as the Eibishter serves our purpose. In other words, they had a different chap. Avodah says, Hashem exists, I can't relate to Him. He's too big, He's too encompassing. I'm going to create a bunch of little gods. I can relate to them one at a time. The Dor Hafluga said, we're going to relate to the one big God. We're going to make Him smaller. We're going to make the Eibishter a name. His truth is only as useful as a relationship, has a relevance for us. The truth of Hashem is absolute. The truth of Hashem is not in relationship with us. Being a servant of Hashem doesn't mean worshipping the name of Hashem. It means worshipping the Eibishter. In other words, I'm not giving Hashem something that tomorrow should send me a check. I'm worshiping the Eibishter because He's emes. This was their sin. This was their aveda. Of course, you could explain it in more detail, but this is the essence of it. So how many pshatim did we have? How many pshatim did we have? 3 or 4? Wait, 4. The Kli Yakar, the Ralbag, the Kli Yakar, the Rabbi B'chai, and the Kabbalah. The Ralbag says he's protecting people from themselves, from their sins. The Kli Yakar says the Eibishter saw that it's going to lead to politics, so He saved them from the politics. The Rabbi B'chai says the Eibishter wanted them to settle the world and they didn't want, even if their intentions were very sincere, it forced them. Kabbalah says they wanted to make their Eibishter their subordinate, their name. And I'm going to say something in conclusion. I don't think that what I'm about to say is the same, but I'm going to say it anyway. People say that Aristotle believed in God. People say that Aristotle believed in God. And it's true, he used the word God. He did have a concept of a deity, of a God. That's people say that doesn't say that are deities. But if you'll study, I never learned Aristotle, I have no intention of learning Aristotle, but I learned Ben Nevuchim. You'll study the God that Aristotle believed in, and you'll discover something very interesting. The God Aristotle believed in was his servant, not his master. What did Aristotle understand that's not understood by the modern sciences? What's the fundamental difference between the Greek approach and the modern scientific approach? The modern scientific approach is always about the detail. Analyze smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. Break it up into small. Look at smaller and smaller pieces. A molecule, an atom, an atomic particle, a subatomic particle. So smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And we look at these tiny little pieces, and we conclude that what makes the tiny little pieces into larger pieces is energy. Right? There's energy in an atom. It's drawn naturally to another atom, and it becomes a molecule. So Aristotle didn't look at the world in a microscopic way. He looked at it from the big to the little. He saw a person. Wow, who put that person together? He couldn't fathom, he couldn't accept the notion that subatomic particles should become atoms, should become molecules, should become cells, should become organic, should become limbs in our body. And frankly, Aristotle was closer to the truth. Aristotle believed in the concept of a soul. If you see order, there's a soul. If you see something beautiful, someone made it beautiful. It didn't happen by itself. You look at a beautiful flower, you look at a leaf, and you see all those designs, there's a soul to that leaf. It's not just molecules came together and they, by mistake, became beautiful. There's an neshama to everything. He called it angels. There's little angels and big angels. And the biggest angel of all is the angel of the whole universe. This is God. But what is God's function? To sustain the universe. What is the Eibishter? The soul of life. In other words, Aristotle's concept of God was But the only reason God exists is because we exist. He helps the world exist. Is there anything to Hashem other than the fact that He gives life to the world? No. Or to say it in the modern language, there's no proof of it. So I started to believe in Eibishter. But what is the Eibishter? He gives me life. With the emphasis on me, not on Him. He believed in God. But the God he believed in simply allows him to do what he wants, not what the Eibishter wants. And perhaps that's the pshat. They wanted to make the name of the Eibishter God. Only the Eibishter, as much as it serves their purpose. This was the Aveda, that's the Aveda. In any case, we learned 4 pshatim. The Gemara says that the Kohen Gadol used to read on Yom Kippur from the Sefer Torah. The king used to read by Hakel from the Sefer Torah. And when he finished, he used to say, no, he didn't say it's 11:15, Elimon. He didn't say
No. He wore the Torah on his arm.
He said, Yoyse mimasha karasi lefnechem. That was a good try. Yoyse mimasha. Yoyse mimasha karasi lefnechem kosav. More than I read is written here. There's a lot more here, and I'm leaving it to you for the